I'd like to share with you what I thought was a solid conversation with a new client couple. It's my hope that what I shared with them is a help to you the way it was to them. He is 32, she's 31. They both have no children, and they have been together for 2 years. They came to me, she started the conversation and said, "Doc, I'm coming to you because I'm hoping you can help us salvage our relationship." I said, "What's going on?" She said, "Well, we've had some challenges over the last 2 years, but I believe we are committed to trying to make it work. And we wanted to come to you to see if you could help us work through some of our complications." I said, "Sir, is this correct?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "So what are the challenges that you've been having?" She said, "Well, we both have cheated on one another." I said, "How many times?" They said, "Once." I said, "Sir, is that true?" He said, "Yes." She said, "We both cheated on one another, but we've just had a very toxic relationship." I said, "In what way?" She said, "Well, I have problems with him when it comes to how he talks to me, how he handles me. He can be very dismissive when it comes to how he treats me. And he can very much be a person that doesn't listen to the things that I say to him and doesn't seem to hear me and want to hear me or communicate effectively with me." I said, "Sir, is that true?" He said, "Yes, sir, it is." He said, "And she also can be very difficult to communicate with. Very toxic in her communication patterns, very much her way or no way at all. She's very much a person who lives in her feelings and in her emotions. And Doc, it just isn't clicking." I said, "Interesting." I said, well, this is interesting, and I want to give you both kudos for being honest, and you didn't rebut what the other person had to say. It sounds like both of you are being fairly honest with this, right?" They both said, "Yeah." I said, what have you done to do the work to work on your relationship?" She said, "Well, I've been in therapy." I said, "How long have you been in therapy?" She said, "For about 6 months." I said, "And what work have you been doing?" She said, "Well, I talk to my therapist about once every 2 weeks." I said, "So once every 2 weeks, 6 months, if my math is right, that's about 2 times a month. 2 times 6 is 12. So you've seen your therapist 12 times in 6 months, correct?" She said, "About that much." I said, "And nothing has changed about your attitude or your emotional maturity?" She looked startled. He didn't say anything. She said, "Well, I guess not if he's saying he still has these problems." I said, "Are these problems legitimate?" She said, "Probably so." I said, "So what's been the purpose of therapy?" She said, "I've been going." I said, "Ma'am, understand this. Going to therapy is like going to a classroom, walking in a classroom. You have the opportunity to learn something, but if therapy or counseling or coaching is going to be done well, you've got to apply what you learn." I said, "Ma'am, it doesn't sound like you're applying anything." He said to me then and then interrupts and says, "Well, Doc, we came to you because we knew you would be straightforward. At least I knew you would be straightforward because she recommended that we see her therapist. I didn't want to see them. She came up with a list of all these other people that they wanted to see. I didn't want to see any of them either, but she also follows your work. She showed me you." I said, "I'll talk to him." I said, "Well, I appreciate that, sir. I'm going to be very straightforward." And I said, "And here's the truth. Your relationship is what's wrong with modern dating." She chuckled like that as if I had the audacity to say to her what I said. He didn't say anything. I said, "Let me tell you something." I said, "Both of you, very attractive couple. She's a very attractive woman. He's a very handsome man." She indicated that she makes a really good living. She's a sales executive, and he also makes a really good living as well. He has money. He's very handsome to look at. She's very attractive. She has finances. All these things. I said, "But you guys have a bunch of chemistry and a bunch of dysfunction. And you all are the prototypical example of what's wrong with modern dating." I said, "Let me just ask you a crazy question. It may sound in left field before I just end this conversation." I said, "How did you meet?" She said, "Well, we were at a dinner party for a friend that was getting engaged. And my friend knew of him. He was there because her now husband was then fiance, was really good friends with him, and they introduced us and we started talking." And I said, "How did you guys proceed to a relationship?" She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What were the conversations you had about things like values, your past, your mental and emotional wellness? Did you guys have any of those conversations?" She didn't say anything. He said, "Honestly, Doc, we didn't. It just kind of escalated from 0 to 100 really fast." I said, "That's what I thought." I said, "Listen, what you both have in one another is what you both deserve and what you qualify for." And I said, "I'm going to make this really plain. Look at both of you. She looks the part, but she has no mental or emotional maturity. She looks like the beautiful woman that any man would want to see, but she doesn't have mental and emotional stability and maturity. She can't control her emotions." I said, "Ma'am, is that correct?" She said, you're probably right. I said, either I am or I'm not. She said, yes, sir. I said, sir, is that correct? He said, yes, sir. I said, but you're no different. You make great money. You're handsome. You look nice, but you have no emotional maturity either. You can't communicate. You have no spiritual stability. You possess the inability to control your thoughts, which is in turn causing your emotions to be all over the place, so that when you all do have arguments, she indicated early on the call that he's good for screaming at her and yelling at her and doesn't know how to talk to her. I say, so you can't control your emotions, but you look the part. You probably go to the gym, right? He said, yeah, I go every day. You go to the gym, you make great money, but you can't control your emotions. She looks good. She's beautiful. She's attractive. She makes great money, but she can't control her emotions either. And you all are prototypical of what we see today in modern dating. And in fact, both of you have been encouraged to be what you are. Women have been encouraged to look great and they can have their way. And meanwhile, they can't have their way enough to control their own emotions. I said, and men have been encouraged to make a lot of money and go to the gym and look good, and then you can have your pickings of who you want. But the problem is you don't have the mental, emotional, or spiritual stability to be able to be in a relationship that's going to be a healthy one. I said, guys, am I wrong? They both looked at me and said, no, sir, you're not. I said, this is why healing is a holistic matter. If you know anything about my 5 areas of healing, I don't just tell people to make a lot of money and look good, or else you're going to be like everybody else that's in this piss pool that we call dating. I tell people you need to heal mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and financially. And it sounds like both of you are checking 2 boxes at most. And that's a stretch. She said, Doc, that's pretty straightforward. He did too. He said, this is what we signed up for. He said, he looked at her and said, this is why I wanted to talk to him. I didn't want to talk to your people. I said, that's fine. And I appreciate the compliment, but understand this. Both of you right now are in a relationship that's sitting in coach. I said, have you ever been on a plane? They said, of course, Doc. I said, have y'all ever flown first class? They said, we have. I said, have you ever sat in coach? They said, we have. I said, there is nothing extraordinary about being in coach. Do you know what extraordinary means? He said, Doc, well, it means, great. I said, no, extraordinary does not mean great. Extraordinary means just a little bit more than ordinary. You know what ordinary means? She said average. I said, exactly. This relationship at best is average. And if you look on social media and look around you, you two are prototypical of what people desire when they scroll on social media for a relationship. Nice looking woman, well put together man. He makes great money. She does too, but she can't control her emotions. She cannot control herself and communicate well. She doesn't understand how to set proper boundaries. She doesn't understand that you just can't have your way. And he doesn't have the mental, emotional, and spiritual ability to communicate with the woman so that he can be able to effectively be engaged with her. And all we see on social media are images like you all that people aspire to have. And when you get it, you get shocked that all you have is somebody that's either pretty or rich, but they still not special. She started crying. I was shocked. He just sat there, looked at me stone-faced. He finally said, so then, Doc, what should we do? Well, this is easy. I said, you can either break up or you can stay together. He said, that's simple. I said, yeah. I said, if you break up, then both of you can go and work on yourselves and work on these areas that you need to really improve on so that you can become better versions of yourself. I said, and if you decide to break up, please understand that right now, as of today, this relationship is in coach because both of you, from a healing perspective, are sitting in coach. If you break up, don't leave this relationship and try to go date somebody in first class. He didn't say anything. She just looked at me. I said, do you want to understand why? She said, why? I said, because that ain't your level. And this is what people do. You end up in coach relationships and you aspire to have relationships in your life that are healed, first class, but you ain't doing first class work. I said, ma'am, going to therapy is just like going to class again, but you ain't taking no notes and you ain't applying nothing to your life. You ain't doing no work and he ain't doing no work either. If you're going to get out of this relationship, don't hop out of coach and think you're going to just sit in first class without doing what? He said, paying more, a higher ticket price. I said, exactly. Which means you got to do some work. And right now, both of you are on the coach level. There are levels to this. If you break up, work on yourself so that you don't connect with somebody else and have them sitting in coach with you. You don't deserve a first class relationship because you ain't in first class. And I said, that really bothers a lot of people. Now, you can stay together if you choose to do that. And if you choose to stay together, recognize, number one, you're both sitting in coach. Because both of you have what? She said, work to do. I said, not only do you have work to do, you can either die and be comfortable and coach, which means you can just continue to live this way and date one another and then break up and then go with somebody else and end up right back in coach because you haven't worked on the problem. Or you can stay together and decide to grow in coach and say, listen, here are the things we need to work on mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially to be the best version of us so that you can both work together to move where? He said, to first class. I said, sir, you don't deserve a healed relationship you have not worked for. I said, ma'am, you don't deserve a healed boyfriend that you yourself have not worked for. And both of you are expecting a healed partner, a first-class relationship, and you ain't done first-class work. You're sitting in coach in the back with the cold peanuts. That's where you're sitting. And that's where this relationship is, because we are dealing with what we see commonly. You went for one another and you didn't ask about values. You did not inspect the person's fruit and who they are and what they represented. You did what a lot of people do. They pursued a relationship based on surface qualities. And when you pursue surface relationships, you get what? She said, surface results. I said, that's exactly what you got. A pretty woman, a rich man, and ain't nothing special about both of you. You sitting in the back of coach, in coach, on this airplane with everybody else that's pretty, that's rich, and ain't special. I said, but ma'am and sir, if you're going to sit in first class and have first class relationships in your life, that comes with a different set of expectations. People have to learn how to control their thoughts mentally. Through those controlled mental thoughts, they have to learn how to stabilize their emotions so that they lead with their thoughts and not their emotions, so that they can properly communicate with others. You need a spiritual foundation for the things that happen in your life that you don't understand. Yes, you need to physically work on yourself and consider your physical needs in every way. And you also need to be financially stable. I said, y'all just checking 2 boxes at most. And you're wanting a healed relationship that you are not prepared for. If you want a healed relationship, you need to do the work so that you deserve a healed relationship. And the reality is, when you sit in first class because you have done the work, you don't even entertain people that's sitting in coach, because you recognize that if you entertain them, yes, it's a risk. And if you're willing to take that risk, knock yourself out. But you recognize that most times, if people are only checking 2 of the 5 boxes, that risk ain't worth the reward. Understand that if you want first class relationships, you need to first of all work to be first class yourself. And then make sure the people you're connected to, if they ain't in first class, they're working their way up the aisle and on their way to being there. I said, does this make sense to y'all? He said, Doc, you got a new client in me. He said, I've never been in therapy, but that was the straightforward correction that we needed. What do we need to do next? I'm pleased to say we have set up a package of 5 sessions. They're on session 3. They're making tremendous progress. They're communicating with each other better. They've identified which of the 5 areas they really need to work on, and they're doing much better today. I hope this story made sense. If it did, type church in the comments with 3 R's. And then remember, you've got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you. What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Zeb. Listen, I've been dying to make this announcement for a very long time now, and I'm pleased to say that Inspire Nation has officially launched. Yes, we finally got a Facebook and YouTube community group where we're going to have exclusive content, exclusive shorts, exclusive discussion prompts, where we're going to engage with other people literally around the world who are on the same healing journey that we're on. I need you to go find these pages right now on Facebook and YouTube. Inspire Nation, follow the page, join the group, introduce yourself, and be prepared to link up with literally thousands of people around the world who are on the same healing journey, who are looking for the same resources, and who want to also be surrounded with other like-minded individuals who are growing in the same direction as you are. I'm so excited about this because it's the beginning of some great things I can't talk about right now. Listen, you got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you.